This is Barrie, a city constantly evolving. At any time, a whole host of pressures challenge the intricate tapestry of city government. In this series, we will explore the priorities deemed essential for progress, even if they don't always inspire unanimous applause. Join me each week for a candid conversation with a member of our city government, as we uncover the stories behind the scenes of Barrie, a city on the move. Welcome to Barrie City on the Move. I'm RF Khan, and it's my pleasure to join you wherever you're receiving this content, whether it's online, on cable, or on YouTube and streaming. Thanks for allowing us into your life. In this series, we aim to explore the inner workings of city governance, city hall operations, including partner relationships with outside agencies, all with the goal of ensuring that the city is delivering a quality of life as expected by the resident, ratepayer, taxpayer. That's you and me, for that matter. Today on the show, we're looking to discuss the conversation around water, and water is certainly at the epicenter of our life, and I'm thrilled to have a guest with me today, Diane Moreau, who's the Manager of Water Operations with the City of Barrie. Diane, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's get into it, and we're gonna have a lot of things, and I'll let you know, and I kind of just let you know before we started recording that I actually got a little bit of audience participation on this one, reached out and asked some questions, and turns out many of the contributions that came that we'll talk about later were ones that I had on my mind, and so we'll get into that sort of later on in the show. Let's actually take a look at, for starters, a little bit of the history and why water is a key focus. Obviously, we know it's a part of, light, air, oxygen, water, all things that are required for life, but there's actually a lot of science and a lot of focus and priority around the safety of the water we consume. Give me a little bit of background on sort of maybe how we got to where we are in terms of water regulations and operations.
Absolutely. So we're regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act that actually came about as a result of the Walkerton tragedy, which is actually 25 years this year since that happened. And as part of that, Justice O'Connor at the time had made numerous recommendations to the province as to, what things we needed to do to kind of maybe step up the bar when it came to protecting our customers and our residents and ensuring that when, you turn on the tap, there is safe drinking water. So really it was kind of from Walkerton and 25 years on, we're very regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's pretty much the basis of it, I would say.
Is there something that stands out to you aside from legislation or regulation that we didn't do this before and we do it now, like just a major shift?
I wouldn't say so. I think there was a lot of aspects that came from it, and it's been years for things to either come on board or get rolled out. It looked at training of personnel. It looked at ensuring that we had sufficient funding for operations, for resources across the province, ensuring we had the regulated bodies that were able to come out and do the inspections they needed to do on our system to ensure that we kind of were meeting the regulations. So I don't think there would be anything extra. I think there's just been that continual improvement throughout the years from maybe where we started. Like I said earlier, the Safe Drinking Water Act hasn't really been updated in 20 some odd years. So it's really everything else that comes along from a continual improvement process.
Perfect. So my words, not yours, and I want to give you that massive disclaimer there. These are my words. My interpretation of that is that really it was more the accountability piece.
Yes.
And maybe, nothing major had happened before of a certain significance, and then all of us, we kind of think that'll never happen to me.
That's right.
And then it did. So really what's come out of it is accountability and due diligence.
Absolutely.
Being maintained. Okay.
And one of the biggest pieces of it too, from a municipal perspective, is having our quality management system, and that covers everything from considering infrastructure, competencies of staff, training of staff, and it really, very similar to an ISO system, really sets those parameters and those standards to ensure that we're always in a place of continual improvement and ensuring that we meet the standards that are required of us.
Perfect. So One of the things that I think we should probably establish for the sake of this show is that not all water, when it comes to discussions around water, it's not all equal. So we have drinking water, and then we separately have wastewater, for example. We're not going to be talking about wastewater today.
Okay.
And for those at home that have fun with that kind of subject matter, sorry, we'll talk about that on another day. But today we're talking about the consumption of water, whether it's for drinking purposes or just pretty much whatever comes out of our tap.
Right.
Fair enough. Okay. Now, even with that in mind, not all water sources are equal, and Barrie's in an interesting geographic position that we've got the bay, and that we've got other sources of water. So there's not one source of water that is feeding all homes. Take us on a bit of a tour.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, if we wanted to split the city in half, the north end of the city is supplied by our groundwater sources, and the south end of the city is supplied by the surface water treatment plant, which is taking water from Kempenfelt Bay. So our plant's been online for just over 10 years or a little bit more now, and our north end has groundwater sources. So we have 12 groundwater wells that pull from very deep aquifers and supply the north end with drinking water. And then our south end takes water from Kempenfelt Bay, treats it at the surface water treatment plant, and then distributes it to the residents and our customers in the south end of Barrie.
So we'll get into some of that description in detail, how different sources of water are treated. I'm sure there are some questions of if I'm getting my water from a well versus I'm getting my water from the bay, is it effectively the same water? Or is it, am I being treated differently? Am I getting the same level of service and quality? I want to get into some of those things with you today. But at the very core, or at the source, these sources are different.
Correct.
Okay, and so one can expect, I think it's fair to say one can expect that depending on where you live, there might be some nuances. Now, all residents of Barrie, though, and I promise you we wouldn't get into finances or anything like that, but we're treated the same in terms of the way we receive our billing and our services or our fee for services.
Correct. Regardless of what your source is, your fee, your level of service, how we operate our system, and how we maintain our system is the same on both ends. It just basically comes down to the type of source is a little different for sure, and the treatment for the sources is different.
Okay, and when we get into the regulation and the act in terms of ensuring compliance, again, regardless of whether you're coming from a well or whether you're coming from the bay, same standards of care.
Correct.
Excellent. So with that in mind, just a little bit of crossover. We're currently having this conversation during the middle of winter, and just from a perspective of, there's some people who think one side of the government doesn't necessarily know what the other side of the government's doing. Recently had one of your colleagues on the show, Dave Friery, and he was discussing winter control. We're in winter right now. We've got some incredible accumulation happening right now, and we do treat our roads with different materials depending on the temperature or the type of snow that we're receiving, et cetera. And one of the concerns is around salt.
Right.
And so that's taken into consideration. You were talking offline about environmental protection zones or drinking water protection zones. Give me a little bit of information on that, please.
Yeah, and again, going back to kind of what transpired after Walkerton, one of the big things that came out of that was the multi-barrier approach. And so as part of that, it's really from source to tap and source water protection. And that's kind of perhaps what Dave, was talking about with the salt. And so that is part of, from source to tap. That's not necessarily part of our operations, but certainly something that's considered. So there are protection zones around the wells and around the intake for our surface water treatment plant to really protect our sources. So I know there are policies and rules in place to really, at the end of the day, ensure that we're doing our best to protect the sources we have today.
Now, for those who are receiving water through a sourced from a well or sourced from an aquifer that's brought up by a well you were teaching me about earlier, if it's not going to the surface water treatment plant, where does the actual maintenance and care and treatment and testing happen?
From a well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I can't remember if I mentioned earlier, but we have 12 sources, and so at those sources is very, I would say, simple treatment in comparison to the plant. So we obviously treat with chlorine for disinfection, and one of our wells has UV to assist with disinfection as well. And some iron sequestering. So yes, our groundwater sources are really high in minerals, and so we do add sodium silicate, it's called, to the system for treatment, and that's just to help keep that iron in suspension so it's not, precipitating out. And, our customers might see sometimes some discoloration in their sinks or toilets, but it's really intended to kind of keep that in suspension. No real health impacts from that, but it is naturally high in iron.
So one of the things and we'll talk about that in a little bit later on the show as well, but one of the things that really kind of came to mind is, if we were to go for a walk in the woods, go for a walk in the wilderness, there are people who go into Algonquin Park, or they go into, into a forest, a national forest, and you see water coming through a stream, you see water coming, it's fast moving, active water, maybe it's coming through a waterfall. There are people who just sort of dip their cup in and drink, or just go in and take a drink out of these wells, these sources, they're coming from the ground. It's actually pretty fascinating to learn that Mother Nature, for lack of a better name, takes care of much of this for us.
Yes, absolutely. Even the raw water that's coming out of those wells is pretty safe. Yes, we still do use the chlorine, like I mentioned earlier, to ensure that we're killing any of those bacteria or viruses that potentially could be in the water. But because of the depth of it, as you said earlier, Mother Nature's kind of taking care of it. That water is moving through bedrock and whatever type of material might be, below the surface, because our wells are pulling from hundreds of feet below the surface.
Excellent. So with that in mind, when we come back from a break, I do want to go into some of the differences in how we look at water, how we treat water, and look at, because there are some differences, I would say, in the process, based on the fact that you're talking about when it's coming from a well, it's coming right from already some natural filtration, versus when it's coming from the bay, we're taking it more at a bit of a surface level,
Correct.
hence the name surface level,
Yep.
surface water treatment plant. So let's get into a little bit of that conversation and dive a little bit deeper into what some of the processes are. Does that sound fair?
That sounds great.
Excellent. So stay with us. Diane Moreau, who is the manager of city water operations, will be right back explaining more about how we consume our water and how we do so safely. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and Diane Moreau, manager of Barrie Water Operations, is here, and we're talking water. We're talking about the different sources of water in the city of Barrie. If you live in the north end, you're typically accessing your water from, I think you said 12, one of 12 different sources of water, and maybe even growing in the future, who knows? And then if you're in the south end, we're typically receiving our water as a result of the work of the people at the surface water treatment plant. Now, before we went to break, we were talking about some of those differences. We were also talking about how we get a little bit of an assist, obviously, from natural filtration that goes on in the different layers of sediment below the ground level. But let's actually talk about between sort of the source, the aquifer, and then coming through the well to my tap, in the north end where we are using well water.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that happen sort of in between, and how are we maintaining it and ensuring, not just the safety, and that's obviously critical, but also just the reliability and the dependability of the service?
Absolutely. So if we're talking about the wells on the north end, the distribution on the south end would be quite similar. It's just, again, back to the treatment that would differ. But from the well, it typically will go to a tower of sorts, so to help with providing that pressure, to provide water. When you turn on the tap, that's all pressure. It's not us turning buttons at any of our stations or what have you. But there are transmission water mains that we have, and so that's usually something where people don't have services directly off our transmission water mains. That's usually sending water straight to either a tower or a reservoir, which is like a storage tank. Some are above ground that you might see on Harvey Road, and some are below grade, so they might not be as visible to someone driving by. And then we have our distribution water mains. So those are all underground, and those are really what provides water to our customers. So underground, distribution mains, and then from there, their services to your house run off those distribution water mains. There's hydrants in there as well. And I think one thing, I failed to mention earlier is certainly our priority is providing drinking water, but the other main focus of our system is fire demand, fire flow, right? And so we need to ensure that we're maintaining the system from a drinking water perspective, but also from a fire perspective. So we talked about the mains, we talked about the services, hydrants, those are maintained as well semi-annually to ensure that they're operational should they be required. And then we have valves on our distribution main that we go out regularly turning them. You might see some of our staff on the road with a truck, whether they're doing it manually or with like a little arm in the truck. And that's just ensuring that at any point in time, should something happen below grade, like a water main break that we do have, that we're able to really isolate the system and really try and avoid people having no water. Our goal is really to maintain service and ensure that people can still turn on a tap when we might be having some challenges within the system. So yeah, we talked about the valves, the distribution system, the services, hydrants, and that's pretty much it from kind of if you're looking from source to tap.
Now, you did talk about obviously the towers, and if you look around, whether you're driving up Bayfield near, near Georgian Mall, you'll see there's a tower there, or whether you're looking out, I think, Ferndale, or then in the south end near Mapleview and Bryan Drive, et cetera. There are some of these. The city continues to grow. And again, I promise you we're not going to talk about taxation and budget, but this is a massive undertaking. Infrastructure is massive. I think we're looking at combined new area development as well as existing built boundary, as was referred to, looking at around $3 billion plus worth of assets in terms of infrastructure in general.
Yeah.
And some of this infrastructure may not have been renewed in 50 years.
Yeah.
A number of your customers, residents in the city of Barrie, certainly in the north end, they've seen their roads ripped up, and it's not just a resurfacing that can get done in a matter of a couple of weeks. We're looking at actually lifespan and replacement of some of this critical infrastructure. Some of the actual materials being used are being updated and replaced. Talk to me about sort of the shift, why, and what have we learned over the decades, so to speak, about infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, Barrie is fairly a young, I'm going to say, municipality when it comes to infrastructure from a water perspective in comparison to municipalities across Ontario and Canada. However, our infrastructure is aging. And the north end, those are the systems we had in place. So before the plant came online, it was just wells that supplied the entire city. I know Barrie has grown, exponentially over the years. And so like you mentioned earlier, the works that we've done in the north end, we have gone in and replaced a lot of our old water main, and I don't know the stats on years of it, but we're actually in a fairly good position when it comes to replacing some of the old galvanized. One of the hot, has always been kind of a hot topic, but more so in the United States, and certainly will make its way into Canada, is the lead and copper. That's, I know a lot of our neighboring municipalities across the border are dealing with, and that's something that we're, I think we're in a really good position that we don't have any really old lead service, transmission mains that are material that has lead in it is what I should say. So that puts us in a really good position that way. But a lot of those old galvanized mains have been replaced. The south end is obviously a little newer, so there isn't a lot of construction works going on with respect to water mains and things like that. You did mention earlier the growth that's happening. So as part in the south end, there will eventually be another reservoir that will help us provide the water that we need to provide to the south end of Barrie. Mm-hmm.
And did we learn anything in terms of obviously the lead content or the lack of lead content obviously being critical? The galvanized we'd see rust and we'd see sort of sediment build up inside. You've switched to a different product. I don't know if you call it PVC or what type of plastic. It is PVC. It's PVC. Characteristics that better for longevity or better for health or both, or expansion contraction. We see typically water mains breaking in the winter because of what, freeze thaw, I'm assuming, or?
There's a variety of reasons it can be, but it's usually our older mains that just have a certain lifespan and just don't cooperate. And you know, usually during colder temperatures for sure, we average about, I'm going to say 35 water main breaks a year, which is pretty good. We have about 700 kilometers of water main, so I think our rates are pretty good there when it comes to breaks. I don't know the PVC is the type of material we're using today. I know there's always concerns with plastics, and that's part of it. And so I don't know what, the future for that, but certainly it, can withstand, I think, a little bit more of, whether the freeze thaw or like you said, the old metal pipes. They have they're called tuberculations in them. And so, we talked about our water in the north end being very high in mineral content, right? And so that stuff just likes to build up in there. It's called, bioaccumulation. And so that's why, residents might see us more in the north end trying to flush out and clean out the pipes just for that reason.
Okay, so and in spring we typically will see towards the end of the snowfall, we'll see sweepers going out there, and as your colleague mentioned, as Dave mentioned, sweepers will try to prioritize the north end around the lake and make sure that they're catching any of that sediment so that it doesn't enter the drinking water. But then also we'll see crews going out and flushing hydrants and things like that.
Correct.
Again, is that just to move the sediment along, or what are we looking at?
It's really to assist with water quality and moving large volumes of water along to help us in the system. We've made some operational changes too, so that we keep that water moving a little bit more frequently through the tower, so it's not sitting and accumulating sediment. But most of the flushing activities, our residents, customers might see would be in the north end. And again, I know I've said it a few times, but it's just that heavy mineral content that we have in our groundwater. So the flushing helps with that. We also do swabbing, so they might see us out there with big pieces of foam going through our hydrants and going through the system and doing a really good clean of our system, so that hopefully, that water quality, and it's not that it's unsafe, it's just aesthetically maybe not pleasing because it's discolored.
And I think that is a big consideration, what it looks like aesthetically. Yeah. We'll get into that again, as I said, a little bit later on, but now you did talk about obviously fire and water pressure required to assist and fight fire, obviously, as if not the number two, maybe even life-saving, right? It's tied for number one, let's call it that, so we don't upset our friends in the fire service. However, water pressure and hydrant clearing, etc. We obviously are learning from our neighbors to the south who are fighting forest fires, and they've had some challenges obviously with having zero water pressure, etc. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the fact that the city of Barrie's been in a really remarkable state in being able to continually deliver water pressure and water service, and we've had very few outages. I don't know if the word redundancy comes to mind, or when something happens, how is it that Barrie is able to continue to deliver water so effectively? Absolutely, redundancy is part of it. I think this way our system was designed so that, we can, like I said, if we have the ability, let me back up. If your system is maintained as it should be, then those valves that I talked about on our water mains will operate as they should, and we can shut off the water, so that, if those valves aren't working, you're having to go further and further out to turn off the water, which then could impact way more residents. And so that's an important piece of our maintenance and operations, is ensuring that works. So I think, yes, redundancy, because we have multiple sources, but also the maintenance that we do to ensure that things are operating as they should. So in events like that, we have very little uninterrupted service. Now, speaking of maintenance, obviously I wake up in the morning and I go and I want to brush my teeth, I turn on the tap, I expect water to be there. And that is thanks to a lot of the maintenance work that staff are doing to ensure that we've got water. Yeah. But from the meter into the house, it's actually my house, it's my responsibility. If I'm a landlord or a homeowner, I've got some responsibilities for taking care of my own internal infrastructure. I bet you get a lot of calls for service, something's not right, it's not working, etc. And I'm sure in the age of data collection, You're sort of keeping a log of sort of the frequent flyers, not necessarily the people, but the most commonly asked questions or challenges. How much of the challenge is on the outside of the house versus inside of the house?
That's a good question. Yes, we certainly get a lot of calls regarding water quality in a house, and I don't know the percentage necessarily, but a high percentage usually ends up being internal private plumbing. And so that's something that we've, we have amazing staff that are able to troubleshoot at the phones and really walk a homeowner, or whether it's a property owner, whomever, through kind of have, certain things to look for depending on what you're calling in about, whether it's discoloration or sediment or a variety of different things. And so we take our time to walk our homeowners through some questions and help them really figure out if it's internal. And then if not, we send our staff out to see what might be going on in our system. But yeah, usually we try and rule out the private plumbing piece of it first.
I mean, I can think of, yes, obviously volume matters, but if you've had water standing, maybe you go away for a few weeks, or maybe you're a snowbird or whatever, and you haven't exercised those moving parts or those valves as you talked about, the way your city staff are doing. If we haven't done that in the home, we can anticipate similar challenges.
Yeah.
Fair statement. You've got a resource as well, by the way. Sorry. You've got a resource on the site?
Yeah, our website. So we do try and update it. Certainly always open to feedback if there's something we're missing on there. We did a survey 2 years ago, so we will be going back out to all our customers in the city of Barrie for another survey this year. So what we did hear from them, so if there was information that was lacking on the website, we added some more information on there too. But there could be simple things like the aerators on your tap, right? The little screens, those can get clogged up, and so that could be a simple reason why you might be getting low pressure, or who knows what it could be, right? So that's just an example of one thing. We do get a lot of calls that end up being water softeners. So as we mentioned earlier, the hard water, we do have a lot of customers with water softeners. But they also require some maintenance. So if they haven't been maintained, you might see some effects from that within your own internal plumbing. Just trying to think of some other things that it could be, but there's a variety of reasons sometimes why your internal plumbing just might be, not what you expect when you turn on the tap.
Fair enough. Have no fear. I've got questions that will come up. We'll talk about later, but I'll let you gather your thoughts, catch your breath. When we come back from the break, I want to get into testing, because we've talked about really the infrastructure and the mechanics of delivering water from source to the outlet to the home, but let's talk about the water quality, the water safety, and the testing when we come back from that break. So stay with us for more from Diane Moreau, who's the manager of city water operations at the City of Barrie. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and Diane Moreau and I are having a great conversation around water. It is the source of life. I mean, we need it for everything, whether it's cooking, drinking, hydration, sports, showering, flushing, all sorts of things. And we're having a conversation. We've talked a lot about the mechanics. We've talked a lot about sort of familiarizing ourselves, whether, I live in the north end, south end, what are some of the differences. And in fact, the distribution, I think you mentioned as well, relatively the same whether it's north end or south end, if not identical. But in terms of the collection to get it into the treatment, obviously the north is through aquifers and wells supported that way, and in the south end through the surface water treatment center. Am I close?
Yeah, you got it.
Getting it right on? All right, I'm learning something. It's been a while. Now I just want to throw this out there. I had an opportunity, and I'm going to be completely selfish. I took advantage of it when I was on council to get a tour. I mean, part of being able to speak to our members in the community is have some semblance of an idea of what's going on. So I was able to do a really cool tour. I know that the city makes available to residents some opportunity to actually explore and learn about the city. Maybe you got some information for me on how we can take a peek at what's going on and get a better understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do host tours. They're quarterly and should be posted on the city's website under their special events calendar. So those are there. However, we do have Drinking Water Week coming up the first week of May. And so we'll be doing a little bit more when it comes to posting information about drinking water on social media, but also hosting 2 tours. I believe it's that Wednesday of the first week of May. I probably should have had the date available. And yeah, you just show up and come do the tour. It's about an hour long, and get to see the plant and get to speak to some of our experienced operators that give the tour.
Yeah, the surface water plant is on Big Bay Point.
Correct. 20 Royal Parkside Drive.
Royal Parkside Drive. So, okay, perfect. I know my favorite sushi place is right beside it. So I think this is important to say, actually. We'll take a quick pause and do a bit of a shout out for the City of Barrie in general. For people who are curious of the different services, different departments are hosting opportunities for engagement, open houses all throughout the city, all throughout the year, whether it's winter control or whether it's the police service, the library, the fire service, water operations. There are lots of opportunities to do this. And you mentioned residents can find this information on the city's website. There's an events calendar.
Correct. Yeah. So they just got posted, and I believe we also put 2026 on the calendar. If it's not yet, it will be soon.
Okay, so not to steal your thunder from water operations, but for anybody who's actually interested, many of the different service providers within the City of Barrie are hosting these types of events, and that's a great resource. So go to barrie.ca and then look for the events calendar, basically. Yeah. You've got a ton of resources on there as well. Before the break, we were talking about, and my takeaway really during the break from the conversation was, we do a lot of things, whether it's we have to clean up our computers every once in a while, we go to the gym, we have to watch how we eat, if you're maintaining your vehicle, you're probably giving it an oil change, giving it a tune-up, changing spark plugs once in a while, rotating the tires. Your home, where we spend a fair amount of our time, and I'm not going to say use and abuse it, but our house is full of lots of moving parts that are going to have natural wear and tear as well. The city's website, in your water and wastewater section, has some information, a bit of a primer on how to take care of your home.
Yes, so there's information about, just as we mentioned earlier, about the maintenance that we do. So we'll talk about flushing and swabbing, and then it does go into, what can you do in your home, cold temperatures, what can you do to prevent pipes from freezing. And yeah, there's just a few FAQs, frequently asked questions, that we typically get at the front desk. We've really tried to hone in on ensuring that it's made available to people through the website as well. And we're trying to get out more on the social media of like did you knows and just putting some facts out there to share.
Okay, perfect. And speaking of a did you know, I know that the city's communications department, I'll call them marketing department, but they are a communications department. They'll also be putting out some reminders about the open house coming up in May as well.
Yes, yeah. So, for the Drinking Water Week, absolutely.
Drinking Water Week it is. Now let's talk about drinking water and safety. Now we started the show talking about why did in the last 25 years, as you say, we're sort of, I guess you wouldn't call it a celebration, but we're commemorating and taking note that it was 25 years ago this year that the tragedy happened in Walkerton. And I'm going to call it like I see it. It was around a lack of education of those who were the operators, maybe some contractors, some people who got some contracts to operate it, and they really just kind of let the ball drop. And since then, though, the silver lining is we've become more aware, taken on more accountability. There's a new act. There is a fair amount of education required. You continue to do some continuing education as well. Yeah. Let's talk about the actual testing. So regardless of whether you're getting your water from one of the dozen wells in the north end or whether you're getting your water that is sourced from the bay and the surface water treatment plant, what is some of the testing? How do I know that my water is worth drinking and safe to drink, and should I be up at night wondering about it?
Right. So I guess I'll start off with back to the regulations or requirements. So we take, I think this year the number was over 3,000 samples have been taken from the drinking water, and the regulations outline what you must sample for. So bacteriological is done obviously more frequently, so that's done once a week in the distribution system, upwards of 30 samples a week just for bacteriological. So that's your E. coli and total coliform. But then there's other parameters. So there's the inorganics and organics, but you're looking at things like anything from pesticides to just normal, metals, heavy metals, and things like that. So there's a laundry list of parameters that we have to sample for. But as a resident, if you're concerned as to, hey, what am I drinking and what does it look like, we are obligated to post our report on the website, which will be the updated report for 2024 will be on there really soon. In a couple of weeks, we're mandated to post it by the end of February. And in there, it will tell you every sample we collected and what the result was. So if you really want to have a look into kind of what's in your water and what you're drinking, by all means you can do that. You can also call the office and we can walk you through that and help you out with that as well. But about 3,000 samples, and then we do also have online monitoring. So as much as there's some physical sampling from staff, collecting them in a bottle and sending them away for analysis, we do have online monitors for things like chlorine and turbidity, and that is collecting data. I don't even know, every milliseconds it's collecting data. So there's a lot of data points in our system that we're constantly looking at and reviewing.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating actually. I mean, you think about it, so simple, it's just water. And if and when you have a chance to go in Safe Drinking Week in May and take a tour, it's fascinating. If you don't want to wait until then, there's a video that you've got online. It's a couple-minute video that gives people a bit of an oversight. I mean, and we're talking millions and millions of dollars, $100 million that went into creating this plant, and I believe it was due for an upgrade as well, or there's constant upgrades that are happening to the system. But in terms of different particulate and filtration and ultraviolet and so let's actually talk about though some of the not just the testing, but some of the additives or some of the things that go into the water. And it's actually some really cool formulation about what's happening in the water in the treatment facility, but also what happens by the time it gets to your home, some stuff that magically disappears.
Sure. So at the plant in particular, there's a few more steps than there is at our wells from a treatment perspective.
But there's a reason for it, though. Sorry, I'm just
absolutely, because it's coming from the bay. So as we talked about earlier, the aquifers there is some element of natural filtration that we're not getting from Kempenfelt Bay. Now our intake's not sitting at the surface of Kempenfelt Bay, it's quite deep, but there's still a different treatment process to ensure that we're taking all those elements out that need to be taken out to make it safe drinking water. So there's strainers initially, because who knows what may be coming in through our intake, so we have strainers. Then there's coagulation, so there is material added to the water to kind of make all the particulars, and I'm using my hands, to stick together. So eventually those particulates get heavy and then they'll settle, right, because the weight of them. So it's coagulation and flocculation, it's called. And then from there, it used to be a state of the art. More municipalities across Ontario and Canada, because again, we're 10 plus years, but it was a state of the art filtration plant where we have these little nanofibers, which we have on display and people can touch when they come to the tours. But that really provides that final kind of filtration of the water before it gets hit by disinfection, before it goes out into the system. So I think you were saying, it comes to our house and eventually dissipates, and I think you're referring maybe to the chlorine. Mm-hmm. Certainly there needs to be a level of chlorine in our water to ensure that we disinfect, like I said earlier, the bacteria and viruses, and that it's safe by the time it reaches your home when you turn on the water, because you could be far away from our source, right? And so that's part of that maintenance and the checking and the flushing. We have an obligation to always be checking that chlorine residual to ensure that it's still at the level that we need it at, to make sure that it's safe for when you turn your tap at home.
So I'm just gonna dial it back and tell you what I think I heard you say. First and foremost, the water that's coming from the aquifers and the groundwater, it's deep below, and it's got a relatively nil exposure to airborne contaminants or human contaminants, et cetera. It's coming through the wells. Coming through Kempenfelt Bay, though, I mean, we boat on the bay, maybe we swim in the bay. Maybe kids swim in the bay. Maybe your facial reaction is going to be what I'm thinking in my head. But anyway, the point is, though, that you said you're bringing it not from the surface. You're drawing from deeper down. I mean, the bay's pretty deep, actually, a couple 100 feet deep in certain areas.
Yeah, it's not quite that deep, but yeah.
Okay, And then we're drawing it in, and then the first step is to, you said, adding a coagulation. Basically, I'm interpreting that as a little additive that gets any of the surface particulates together so that you can sort of scoop them out or filter them out.
Yeah, they pretty much settle out as part of that flocculation process. Yep.
Okay, all right, perfect. And then you do the treatment, and as you said, there's the fibrous filtration.
Thousands and thousands of them, yep.
Yeah, and it's super cool, actually. I've had a chance to see it. And then, of course, there's the chlorine. Now, obviously, why do we want chlorine in the water? Disinfection, you're saying. If we had untreated water and it sat, I mean, how long before, and maybe that's not a fair question to throw at you out of the left field, but how long before you can start having some sort of airborne contaminants coming into it?
That is a good question. Well, because I do know that people will leave their water out on the counter just because of that chlorine will dissipate over a period of time. And some people just aren't used to the smell or the taste. You know, maybe they grew up on their own private well and they just don't like the taste of chlorine or the smell of it. So I don't know.
Okay.
I don't want to throw out.
Fair enough. No, fair enough. I'm just, my brain's weird. But then you have a little bit in there, just enough to make sure that we're disinfecting it to get rid of any of those type of contaminants, and then it goes through to your home. Now, we do have to go to break, but when we come back from break, I wanted to ask you some frequently asked questions. I did actually reach out to some members of the community to say, you know, what would you be interested in knowing, or what concerns or complaints or whatever that you want to have addressed. So let's talk about some of those things. I promise you nothing that's going to be, you know, too difficult. I think you probably hear them quite frequently, but I want to make sure that some of the questions that we're all asking and wondering about, how can we answer them? How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Awesome. So stay with us. Diane's going to be in the not so hot seat about answering some frequently asked questions that you've provided me. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and Diane and I are talking about water. And Diane, you're in the hot seat now. I don't know if you feel the pressure. I am actually going to refer to my notes here. I'm pulling out my trusted note-taking device, otherwise known as a phone. But I've got some questions that I had before we met, and of course, as I mentioned, I did throw it out there on social media. You know, shame on me, maybe, but I figured, you know what else is on people's minds when it comes to the water? And I am quite certain that there is a contingency of people who love the drinking water and they drink it all the time, and that's how they grew up and they don't know any different. And then there are probably, you know, those who are staunchly opposed to drinking water because of information that they read, or generationally or environmentally, you know, exposure, et cetera, or maybe it just tastes different. I don't know. So I want to throw out a series of questions for you. We'll go through them a little bit rapid fire. I have a funny feeling you've heard most, if not all, of these before, but are you ready?
I guess so.
Okay, all right. First and foremost, I'll put it out as a topic: water discoloration. Now, you touched on it, and you even touched on it a number of times as what some of the contributing factors of it are. Yeah. Why is it that I sometimes see, you know, a different shade of the water coming through my taps?
Yeah. I think one of the things I didn't mention earlier about discoloration, it could also be a result. I mean, there's a variety of reasons. Yes, we do have high mineral content, and that could be a result of it. But if there's construction in your area, it could disturb the system. Sure. And so we have that information on the website where, you know, we do ask residents, you know, flush your system from a cold tap, not hot water, because that goes through your hot water tank, a cold tap, to really understand what kind of water is coming in from our system into your house. And so really run that, and if it's still discolored, please call the City of Barrie, because we'll certainly still walk you through some of those internal plumbing potentials. And if those are all checked off, that it, you know, doesn't seem to be internal, then we're sending someone out to the field to check our system and what's going on. Okay, perfect. So there are different stages and checkpoints throughout the system which a technician could come and look. So Absolutely. They can look at the main, at the hydrant, or they can look even closer to your home. Yeah, so in that instance, we would start off at the nearest hydrant, see what's going on, because that should be representative of what's going on in our distribution system. Okay, and fun fact, the City of Barrie frequently has trucks and crews going around flushing hydrants to assist with that, because it is common and known. And mineral content, minerals, how bad could that be? Well, there are standards for that as well. A lot of them are more the aesthetic piece of it, so iron and manganese, calcium, and so I don't think they're that bad.
personal opinion, disclaimer.
Yeah.
Okay, but there are standards.
Correct.
There
yeah.
are, okay, acceptable levels. Now, you did mention, by the way, testing it through the cold water because it's not sitting in the storage tank known as your water on demand system, which may not have a storage tank, or a much smaller one, or your potentially 50-liter, 50-gallon hot water tank. If you're seeing it come through your hot water, that may be, if you own your own tank, something to look at, because some of the components in there can go, the rods and stuff like that.
Well, and yeah, again, I think you had mentioned earlier about maintaining. I think your hot water tank should also be maintained. There's a drain to drain that, because minerals can build up at the bottom of the tank.
But if you are renting your water tank, feel free to dial the 1-800 number and have someone come out and check if it's time to replace it or service it. Okay, moving along from that. Water smell, is that closely related to the discoloration or different?
It's different. I think sometimes on the south end, just because it's coming from Kempenfelt Bay, but that's very rare because we do have, and I think I forgot to mention that in the treatment process of the plant, we do basically have granulated activated carbon. So very similar to a Brita that has a carbon filter, we do that at the plant, and that is intended to remove taste and odor. So if you're getting a smell, please call, because it really depends on where you are and what might be happening. But oftentimes it's a chlorine smell we get. And sometimes there just is a chlorine smell in your water that, some folks just don't like the smell of it, but we certainly will still go through and troubleshoot and just make sure there's nothing going on that we need to be concerned about, or you as a homeowner need to be concerned about.
Okay, and again, run your tap. You can run your tap and maybe it goes away, or...
Yeah, like if your tap, if your system you mentioned earlier too, if it's been sitting for a while and that water's stagnant in there, it could be. But we always still encourage people, you can always call us and we can certainly walk you through that and make sure.
And I'm going to make this disclaimer over to the audience. I did say run the tap, and I know that if you run the tap, it's going on the meter and you're paying for the meter, so I got that part. But the other thing though is smell. I did get a nasty rotten egg kind of smell. Mine was from my hot water tank.
Oh.
I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was that rod that has stuff that builds up, that the rod that's designed to eat away eventually over time. Whatever. That's where the smell was coming from. So we did replace it. So if it is a rotten egg smell, do check if it's coming from the hot side as well. Fluoride. That's one that's been a point of conversation. I won't say contention. Some municipalities have it, some don't. Where are we on that map?
So City of Barrie doesn't add fluoride to the system. I don't think it ever has. I think there was I don't think it was a petition of sorts years, probably before I was born. So we haven't never done it, but yes, there are municipalities that do. Now it's naturally occurring in our source water at very low levels, but we don't add fluoride to our system.
And that's a big difference, right? No. Okay, now, and there are some dentists who will say, absolutely, your kid should have it in their toothpaste at a certain age, and then there are other dentists who say adults shouldn't have it after a certain age. Talk to your doctor, et cetera. But as a rule, we don't have it in the City of Barrie, and if you feel like you need it, you could always supplement it, I imagine. But it would be hard for someone to take it out unless you get an aftermarket type of a filtration system at home?
Yeah, and that I don't know. I don't know what type of system you would need to remove fluoride in particular.
And we don't have it as of now.
That's right.
Okay, all right, moving along then from that. Water pressure. Now, we did talk about the fact that there are a number of towers that are holding tanks for water distribution, and I don't know if it's based on gravity basically, but you've got pumps that fill them up, and then when I turn on my tap, basically the water pressure comes out.
Correct.
Why is it then that some areas might say I'm seeing less water pressure than others? We do live in an area that has some mixed topography.
Correct, yeah. So you're absolutely right. So if you're sitting at the lower end of that topography, your pressure is likely higher than someone that's sitting at the top. As you mentioned earlier, it is gravity. We do have things in our system to help prevent things from, blowing up from pressure. So we have relief valves and things like that. But again, there could be something going on in your own internal plumbing, whether your little curb stop on your driveway might not be fully opened. There could be something going on with your service that maybe just needs a flush, which we provide that at Water Operations. You can call us to do a service flush. It just could be other little things within your own home that might be reducing some of that pressure. For larger facilities where we get concerns about pressure, it's sometimes related to just the length of their service going from one end of the building to the other. Well, at the end of that service, your pressure is probably going to be really low compared to where it is when it first comes into your building.
And if you've got a number of taps open along the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So now, if I'm in an area at the top of a hill where I've got lower service, do I have to worry about fire hydrant pressure?
No, so there's a minimum standard that we need to maintain, and that's how our system was designed to have that pressure at those hydrants. So you shouldn't have any concern.
And then I believe our trucks even have some pumps built into them for pressurizing water. But anyway, that's the fire trucks.
I thought you meant our trucks.
No, fire trucks. Sorry about that. Okay, so we are a little bit low on time, but basically those who have softeners, those who don't have softeners, hard water versus soft water. What's your take on that, and recommendation or not recommendation, or?
Yeah, I think it's personal preference. I know we mentioned in the north end quite a bit. Our water coming out of Kempenfelt Bay is hard as well. It's just not as hard as the north end. And so I think it's just personal preference. We do see a lot of challenges and issues when those aren't maintained within your system. So if you have one, highly recommend you do the maintenance on it. But yeah, personal preference on those.
Okay, excellent. So now there is a difference though between a softener and a filtration system when it comes to water, like a carbon or a UV system.
Right. Yes, so not too familiar if our customers have UV systems in their house. That generally is associated with someone who has a private well, which we do have residents that are still on private wells in the city of Barrie, which also comes with its own maintenance for a UV system to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing to disinfect. And then filtration, yep, fridges have the little filters on them, things like Britas and things of that nature. So just highly encourage our customers to, change out those filters and make sure you're doing that on a frequent basis so that, stuff potentially won't grow on those either.
So something to take in mind though, I think, and this is just my own research, obviously a softener, if we had soft water, if you have a softener in your home, you might want to decide how much of that is being routed through to your laundry system and your shower because you like the way it makes your hair feel versus into your drinking water, et cetera. Now, the city of Barrie at the treatment facility though does have the carbon filtration in there.
Correct, and that's simply for taste and odor.
Simply
at
for
the
taste and
plant.
odor.
Yeah.
Okay, last question, and we've got just 30 seconds for this one. Is tap water as safe as my $3 or $5 bottle of water that I can pick up at the corner store?
Yes, and I'd like to venture out and say it is safer. And that's simply just because of what we mentioned for the last hour of this segment is we're just very highly regulated. I think I mentioned 3,000 samples a year. A lot more testing really goes into the water that comes out of your tap in comparison to the bottled water. However, there's a need for emergencies. Bottled water going. If you're going out and wherever you might be going, need some water, encourage you to fill a water bottle. But there are times where bottled water is necessary too.
Okay, so I'm going to say something that I didn't hear you say, but we are highly regulated, strictly regulated under the Clean Drinking Act, or the Water
Safe Drinking Water.
Safe Drinking Act. Sorry, thank you for that. And bottled water may not fall under that same category, and I'll let people do their own homework on that.
That sounds good.
That sounds good. Okay, Diane, I really want to thank you for taking the last hour of your day or plus with us to share this information. We've got to go, but we'll see you next time on Barrie City on the Move. Take care.